Hello. Today I'm going to be taking you through a quick game I played as Harrier, an aperitif, if you will, before the Vagabond video comes out. A grim reminder of exactly how good the Harrier potentially is, for those of you who've never actually played it before. We're not doing anything too special today. We're playing on the Autumn map with a pretty good faction selection. I'm pretty happy with how this is right now because not only am I the first player to act here, but I also start with two really quality cards. Coffin Makers in particular is going to be amazing later. Right now, a little unusual to see the cats in the bottom left, but you know, could be worse. The lizards actually end up setting up in a fairly polite clearing. If they were in the top left, it would have been much worse for the cats here because then they'd struggle to put anything too close to their keep. I'm going to go with this monster. It's one of the strongest vagabonds in the game right now. Probably very comparable to Tinker for those of you who've already experienced that nightmare. We're going to set up in the forest right next to all of the ruins. There's no reason to do it any other way. This faction matchup is actually one of a number of fortunate outcomes for me during this game. My starting hand is great. Cats are a great target for the very aggressive Harrier, and if I need to go and aid a bunch of cards, lizards are an excellent target for that because they're not going to be able to get me hostile very easily. Now I'm just going to slip into one of these ruins, and this is actually maybe one of my least optimal choices right here. At the time, I was thinking I would be able to craft swap meat and steal cards from people who might be trying to withhold the hammer from me, but I am the Tinker and I start with a coin already, so the odds of me drawing something useful, even if it's not the hammer, are pretty good. A more optimal turn might have been to go up to the upper rabbit clearing, because I have a number of cards that I could use to aid to the cats there, allowing me to basically just accomplish more with the items I have on my turn. And because I'm not going to be using boots all that often during this game, I could probably put myself as hostile with the cats right after aiding them, allowing me to start scoring from them immediately. Instead, I go down to this fox clearing where I'm able to pull the hammer, which is kind of lucky because then I'm able to craft fox partisans right away, which is a pretty good craft in the long run, even though I don't use it too often in this game. Since I'll be moving west and north, I don't activate hostility with the cats yet, so since I have nothing better to do, I end my turn here. I draw Saboteurs, which is honestly unlucky for everyone else, because if I can craft Coffin Makers and Saboteurs, it makes it twice as hard to get rid of. This is the first of 3 Saboteurs that are in the Exiles and Partisans deck, and if you happen to start your turn with Coffin Makers in hand, you want to start counting Saboteurs immediately. Most players are going to want to have the Saboteurs crafted pretty much just for Coffin Makers specifically, so if you can wait them all out and then play Coffin Makers, it makes it much harder for your opponents to actually craft it. Right off the bat, we see that the Lizards already has one Saboteur that they just revealed to the entire table for us, so there's one we'll have to worry about later. Of the factions in this mix, I'm actually most concerned about Eerie, and it's not because they're very capable of beating me up, which is true anyways. It's because eventually their scoring pace is going to actually be a problem to potentially outrace me later on in the game. I'll have to worry about them in the long run, but for the first couple of turns, they're going to be gradually building up their scoring pace as they spread out and set up some roosts. Cats, I think, potentially could be a problem, but I won't have to worry about them until the latter third of the game. Right here we see the birds actually move in and decide to fight me right off the bat, and I gotta be honest, it's the right choice. The Harrier, really, if I had drawn the sword, I could have gone immediately into scoring points off of hostility, and I only need those 3 items, the 2 swords, the crossbow, and the torch, in order to be pretty much optimally effective with this character. So them coming over and battling me on turn 1 is actually a really good choice in light of the fact that they believe me to be quite experienced. As a counterpoint, we see the cats craft the hammer on turn 1, which generally is not regarded as the best choice when you're playing with a vagabond in your games, because that's one of the harder cards to get, and the vagabond benefits quite significantly from it. With that second hammer, I am now able to craft Coffin Makers, for example, which ends up being a bad trade in the long run for the cats player. Right here you're going to see me do one of the most important things you can do in Root, which is checking other people's boards. I'm worried about what the birds have set up, and last turn it looks like they just put a card into move, and right now they have 3 cards still in hand. They're not going to be scoring quite as fast because they've taken that turn not to build, but if they didn't have a matching card for their starting clearing, there's not much else they could have done there. Since the Marquise is taking their turn right now, there's not too much to see with their board, but it's important to note whether or not they've done any crafted improvements at this point. They've just got the hammer though, so nothing to surprise me there. Taking a look back at the lizards, it's clear that their hand is very mouse heavy right now. We've got that saboteurs in there, but it tells us that they're going to be sitting in mouse clearings for the foreseeable future, which is probably pretty good for us. They're going to remain accessible, but not so nearby that we need to worry about them jumping out and attacking us later. The Marquis' turn ends up being move, build, and recruit, which is not terribly ambitious, but it's perfectly reasonable to want to establish a bit of a front line already with a game where rule is going to be kind of a challenge for them. Right now my main concern is getting my second sword so that I can start scoring from infamy. It's the reason I kept my torch undamaged last turn, and it's the reason that I'm not going into the forest on this turn, because I really only care about clearing out the ruins at this point. I do want to squeeze a little more value from this turn, however, so I end up deciding to gamble on aiding the lizards, the other saboteur, on the premise that maybe they're probably just going to discard it as soon as they're able to, and this ends up being true, but it could easily have backfired. I end up exhausting the bag to aid here because I'm not close to my bag cap yet, and I know that I'm going to be refreshing more items than I have available to use, so it's not a harmful thing to do. Here we get another great example of just how good it is to be drawing more cards than the other players at the beginning of the game as I draw the coins, which is not only going to give me a bunch of points, it's also going to further speed up my card draw when I'm eventually able to craft it. Over this next turn, we see that the lizard cult's still holding on to both of those saboteurs, but at the end of their turn they don't choose to craft it. As we move on to the bird's turn, we see something that we've been waiting for a little while now, but I didn't notice it at the time. They've put the last saboteur card into their decree, which is excellent for us. With all 3 saboteur cards accounted for, we can craft coffin makers, and we know that it will stay around until the entire discard pile has been reshuffled, assuming that lizards have eventually discarded it. Against my expectations, we see the birds actually attack the lizards here, rather than attacking me again to ensure a forest turn, and I think what they were ultimately doing was trying to keep their own warrior count in check by targeting one of the larger groups of warriors on the board. It's good news for me though, because my current plan is to continue limping along, collect ruins, and if I had to take a forest turn here, I would have slowed that down. I'll try not to mention it every time in this video, but you're going to see me checking everyone's board again, and it's just important to be aware of where all of your opponents are in their engine building and their scoring and what the vulnerabilities of those engines happen to be at any given time. On their turn, the cats not only reinforce their buildings a little more, but they also craft false orders, which in the long run is probably actually beneficial to us. We can't be affected by false orders, but our opponents, the Eerie, absolutely can, and if the cats are going to have false orders on them, it means that the Eerie are probably going to be one of the people suffering from it, which is good for us because they're one of our main competitors right now. My main priority on this turn is to go over and grab that next ruin and use whatever the item happens to be to aid the cats for that hammer. With it, I'll be able to repair 2 of my items, and next turn I'll be able to craft the coffin makers when I go on my inevitable bender of violence. A nice efficient turn that makes use of pretty much all the items we have available. I aid the cats the fox dominance here, even though they're potentially capable of trying for a dominance win, because I don't think it's going to happen if the Eerie are in play, and I think it would be a great distraction to keep the Eerie preoccupied if the cats do go for it. Even though I've already gotten my point for aiding the cats, I'm not going to go hostile here just yet, because I'm enjoying being under the radar a little bit. With the cats at 5 and me at 5, I don't really need to worry about anyone being too scared by my presence just yet, and I may as well keep that going until I have everything online. The lizards still haven't made use of all those mouse cards we saw earlier, so they're really desperate to take over that 3 select clearing right now. They're going to go all in the birds, which is honestly objectively good for us. Anytime 2 people are fighting someone who isn't you, it's great for you. Taking a look at their hand, it looks like they had actually discarded both of those saboteurs as I had guessed, and perfect. That's amazing for us because we're in a position to craft coffin makers next turn, and there's no one who can stop us now. I did make the mistake of freeing up the rabbit dominance card for the lizards to score with, but I'm pretty confident I'll be able to outscore them in the long run, so I didn't think it was too much of a problem at the time. While waiting for the birds, I check my available quests and confirm that yes, both of the other saboteurs have been discarded. I didn't notice the one in the decree at the time, but at the same time, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. On their turn, the birds craft a boot that I will never acquire from them, and they go and attack the lizards again, which continues to be confusing, but good for me. If they keep this habit up when I craft coffin makers, it's going to be extremely lucrative for me in the long run, because everyone's going to be losing a ton of warriors, and I'm going to be collecting money for it. Here the cats attack me, which is honestly a good choice at this time because I'm potentially nearly online. I don't want to use Fox Partisans here because obviously my hand is full of very valuable things, and even though I have to take a turn in the forest, it means that the opponent with the highest current score has now spent their effort in order to stop me. So, could be worse. You'll notice that when I'm choosing to damage items, I'm choosing ones that I'm not planning to really make use of next turn anyways. My plan for next turn was to move into the rabbit clearing, potentially kill that roost if it was available, and craft coffin makers after clearing the ruins. So, because I had to choose some items to damage here, we're going to go with everything except the hammers and torch. The second battle from the cats guarantees my presence in the forest, however, so it doesn't matter what I'm choosing at this point. As a reward for my hubris, I now have 2 ambush cards, which are going to be very helpful if anyone attacks me once I craft coffin makers. Now that I'm actually in the forest, it's time to start thinking about how to optimize my next turn. I could just craft coffin makers right off the hop and start going and killing things, but it's actually probably more efficient to craft the coins instead, both because those extra points make up for the forest turn I just had, the extra card draw will help me in the long term, and because there's 2 roosts that are completely undefended, which I can attack right now, where there won't be any warriors going into the coffin right away. All this fighting between the lizards and the birds has started to put a lot of pressure on the birds recruiting, and they end up deciding to put another card into recruit here. This probably isn't the most optimal choice for the charismatic leader, because in the long run it's going to be more dangerous if you don't have the battles to actually manage it yourself. They take a really interesting choice of running across the map to set up in a cat clearing, which I love. It's very aggressive, very weird, super fun. They're also doing a great job of keeping the edges of their decree blue, which is going to make it pretty much impossible to actually turmoil them intentionally, and is absolutely what they should be doing in every game. The cats end up using that false orders we saw earlier to move the birds out of their space and spend most of their effort re-establishing control over their area. At this point in the game, the cats are actually starting to fall behind, because by now they should be probably in the 10 to 12 point range, but they've been so preoccupied with other things that they haven't had a chance to build enough yet. After some brief shitposting, it's time to take the turn we planned out earlier. You can see in this turn how, even though I could have potentially set myself up to limp over here, collect the ruin, and get the sword, it's far more efficient for me to have actually taken that forest turn, because now I can use all of the tools at my disposal all at once, and continue to do so in the following turns. During these turns, we're going to see the lizard cult finally reach a point where they can score reliably with the gardens they currently have. Their hand is mostly orange and red, and they finally have enough gardens to actually make something effective out of that. Unfortunate for them that it's taken them this long. This is the turn that I'm planning to craft coffin makers, so you see me constantly scanning the discard pile to see if it showed up there yet, or assuming that maybe it got put into the decree earlier, which is correct. On this turn we end up seeing the Eerie target the lizards again, and while I was initially confused and thought it was an effort to keep their recruiting under control, I later realized that it's because they now have 3 birds in recruit, which is actually dangerously high. I end up later learning that the Eerie actually wanted to avoid forcing hostility with me themselves, and instead wanted me to be the one to initiate that. I suppose arguably the loss of that first point would be slightly less efficient, but in all honesty it would have been better from their perspective to just hit me and reduce the overall efficiency of all of my turns, rather than trying to just target that one feature. The cats finally get a chance to start scoring again, and now they're back to roughly where they would want to be at this point in the game. The loss of yet another roost also helps us, because now the Eerie has to get their scoring pace back on track. At the start of our turn, we're starting to finally feel the effects of not having tea yet. Well, the Harrier generally doesn't care about having tea because you only need 2 swords and the crossbow. Because I decided to go and grab everything, it's a little less convenient for me right now because I'll need 2 hammers in order to craft coffin makers. Now that my engine is fully online, you can see where the Harrier really shines, because normally I would have ended in this top rabbit clearing and just been stuck, but now I can just teleport to whatever I think is the most valuable cardboard on the map. And using the fox partisans I crafted earlier, I can take out this cat and workshop for a nice 3-point gain. Sure, it cost me the rabbit ambush I was holding on to, but the rest of my hand is not all that important right now. I swear to God I'm not cheating, but these draws are insane. Even though I lost a turn in the woods, you can see that I'm already back ahead of the pack right now, and because the lizards now decide to use a bunch of conspiracies, they're actually filling up the coffin makers for me quite rapidly. Speaking of, ask yourself, when was the last time you actually checked the discard pile when playing a digital game? It's pretty easy to overlook, and if you're looking for cards that you want to be watching out for your own strategies, it's really a great way to know whether or not you need to worry about something. On this turn, the lizard's probably trying to catch up to the rest of the pack again, and they end up crafting the tea. While it would be nice for me to have 2 of them and the extra 2 points, the cats end up crafting the second one before I get the chance. While it's tempting to say that this might have been a mistake on the lizard's part, I think it really didn't make too much of a difference in the long run, because at this point in the game, I'm already fully online. If I didn't have the tea, I would only be refreshing my combat items every turn, and with it, it just means that I get to do a bit of extra crafting on the side if the opportunity arises. On their turn, the Marquise decides to serve the public good and attack me again, though unfortunately their luck is not currently holding, and they only do a single point of damage to me. If I were in their position, however, I would probably be more worried about where I could find the most points from their available cardboard, because right now they have both the keep clearing and that sawmill over on the west side that both have only 1 cat defending them. And even though the cats potentially could have done quite a bit of damage to me, they probably wouldn't have prevented me from attacking this turn. As truly tempting as those 3 undefended lizard gardens are, unfortunately I don't currently have hostility with lizards, and since I damaged my boot, it would be difficult for me to actually get it. What I do see, however, is that 3 pieces of cat cardboard over on the left-hand side, and the cat's in a respectable 17 points, which makes this a much easier decision to stomach for a faction that I usually hate bullying. What's more, it's also a mouse clearing, which means I can get rid of this useless tea card and pick up the tea for myself while I'm at it. I continue to not be at my bag limit, so exhausting the coins here is a small price to pay for getting the tea. Between Coffin Makers and Infamy, I scored 9 points on this turn, and the table is right to begin talking about ganging up to destroy me. Despite this, the lizards and the birds actually continue their aggression against each other, which is only good for the coffins. Thinking about it now, I wonder if the birds actually had Marine Broker in their hand, because they've been trying to get these mouse clearings for the entire game. If that's true, then focusing on it for this long is a misplay, in my opinion. Not the worst I've ever seen, but generally you don't want to focus on crafting cards for more than a turn or 2. If you have to go more than a turn or two out of your way in order to craft it, then just don't worry about it and throw it away. There's nothing that's so important that you really need to focus on it that hard, even coffin makers, which I focused on because it was on my way anyways. And it's at this point in the game that lizards try to use Propaganda Bureau on a cat in the keep and then roll it back, which causes a soft lock in the game. They're unable to progress at all, and the timer doesn't even appear for their turn, so unfortunately they're forced to leave in order for this game to continue. Real props to them, though, for being willing to drop out like that to solve this weird bug. On their turn, the Eerie commits pretty hard to sending me to the forest again, which is a choice that I cannot disagree with. The challenge for them, however, is that they currently have so much recruiting going on that they can't just focus on me, otherwise they're not going to clear enough warriors to avoid turmoiling. So they need to spread more of those battles out among the other military factions. While they do end up getting the rolls they needed to send me to the forest, it's more expensive than if they had been a little more judicious with their recruiting. The Eerie does draw saboteurs here, but they're not going to be able to use it until next turn, and they know as well as I do that it's not going to matter by that point. We've already reached the situation where the Vagabond is too far ahead and has too many items to be stopped, and even if they had committed several more battles than they already have to stopping me, I would just return from the forest at full strength anyways. While it's tempting to use the hammers to try and limp along by repairing some of my items, I know that the opponents are just going to attack me again anyways, and I wouldn't really be able to account for 4 more points. So I'd just take my forest turn here. None of the other players can find enough points to win on their turns, and it's not really going to cause me any harm to take it now. I was going to hide the names, then I realized I had chat open for 75% of this game, and it would have taken me all a year to finish. I was just having too much fun talking to these guys. With coins in our hand and only 4 points to account for, I decide that we're going to grant a bit of clemency to the people that we've abused for this entire game and finish without killing anyone. We craft our coins and complete a rabbit quest for the last point we need to win the game. And there you go, that's the Harrier. I could have gotten started even earlier if I had topped out the sword, but you can see how even among vagabonds, this one is particularly strong. At no point was I really worried about my path forward because I could be anywhere I wanted to be, and with the draw and crafting luck I did have, it just made me even faster. Thank you all very much for watching, and it's been a delight playing with all the people who appeared in this game, and I'll see you all later.